Welcome to the 17th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing here, celebrating incredibly smart, accomplished music industry executives sharing the stories of their careers, their lives, and anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome back two of my friends who also happen to be digital music pioneers and experts, Dick Huey and Vickie Nauman. These two longtime friends and collaborators graced this stage last month with Dick interviewing Vickie. So it's amazing that we get to invite them back today with the roles reversed. Today, Vickie will do the honors and be interviewing Dick. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work that they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. We love to help people make more connections in the industry so they can help further their own careers. Who Knew is all about helping to facilitate networking, and this online format is the same. We feature executives like the two that we have today. We put them in front of the audience and invite connectivity in hopes that everyone benefits. So please take advantage of this unique access to the speakers and to the rest of the audience by engaging with everyone in the chat window. Also, please submit questions you have for Vickie and Dick to the chat window, and we will address them during the conversation. Now, another thing I want to talk about before we get started is networking and helping people access opportunities. Later today, in fact, immediately following this event, I've been invited by another good friend of ours, Dimitri Vietzi, and his amazing team at Rock, Paper, Scissors, and they're putting on a job fair. Dimitri invited me to MC the proceedings, so please join us at 2 o'clock Central by clicking on the URL you see on the screen there. We've got real companies with real job openings, and we hope to help find some people some work today. Also want to thank our sponsors. Let me thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker. Bufkin Baker is the search firm that I work for. As you know, I'm a headhunter in the music industry. If you're in hiring mode or looking for your next gig, please hit me up. I want to thank Four Roses Bourbon, Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. Now, let's get down to our featured guests. These two are longtime friends and collaborators. They've appeared on countless panels at every major music conference you can name, from South by Southwest, Medem, Billboard, Music Biz, you name it, they've been there. They are both widely respected digital music mavens, and today they are our guests on The Smartest People in the Room. Today's interviewer is Vickie Nauman. She has deep experience in the intersection of music and technology, focusing her business on rights, licensing, products, experiences, and strategic business development. She founded the boutique consulting and advisory firm Cross Border Works and has a portfolio of forward-thinking companies from very large enterprise to early stage startups. Vickie's work spans music legislation, thought leadership, the entire stack of music tech, product management, music finance, partnerships, and being a subject matter expert, giving her unique perspective on the ever-changing global landscape. A digital music pioneer, Vickie worked on licensing and product for one of the first legal digital services, MusicNet, from Real Networks, JV, in 2001. She led strategic partnerships for connected device manufacturer Sonos, started and ran the US business for global music platform 7 Digital, and did digital business in Europe and China as a consultant. In addition, she built one of the first DMCA compliant services at tastemaking station KEXP in Seattle. Prior to 2001, she ran marketing programs and produced live broadcasts in traditional radio for the NPR network. Vickie has a broad network and experience in Europe, China, and the US, and earned a 2006 MBA through the London School of Economics, NYU Stern, and HEC Paris. Her community work includes serving on UCLA's Music Innovation Program Advisory Board and acting as an advisor to South by Southwest music panels. Welcome, Vickie. And joining Vickie as her guest today is Dick Huey. Dick moved to New York City in 1997 to work for independent label powerhouse, The Beggars Group. He created and staffed the group's digital media department as global head of digital in the early days of digital music. In 2002, he launched Toolshed, his New York City-based digital strategy company. Toolshed offered an early bespoke label and artist digital marketing service, which included direct music service licensing and download hosting services that created groundbreaking digital campaigns for a myriad of artists, including Arcade Fire, Sufjan Stevens, Indigo Girls, Ani DeFranco, Amy Mann, amongst hundreds of others. Labels and distributors including Matador Records, Beggars Group, The Orchard, Touch and Go, PIAS, Righteous Babe, and Merge Records were also clients. In 2010, Toolshed expanded into music rights acquisition for consumer brands, media tech, sports, and entertainment companies. Spotify was an early client, and Dick led its U.S. independent label licensing efforts prior to and during Spotify's U.S. launch in 2011. Red Bull Music Radio, Sound Exchange, 8 Tracks, Digital Rights Agency, Red Ski Mountain Resort, and TuneCore were also clients and advisory relationships. Dick is currently head of partnerships for the Sydney-based official music credits and metadata supply company called Jaxsta. He's a digital business consultant to the U.S. independent record label Merge Records, a business development consultant to Techstars Accelerator Win Paperchain, and a music licensing consultant to stealth cloud radio startup Hijack Radio. Most recently, he's taken on a role as contract teaching assistant at NYU professor Scott Galloway's new monthly brand strategy sprint through Galloway's educational startup, Section 4. He held a 9-year board seat at Sound Exchange and advisory and new media committee roles at A2IM and AIM. He's the past executive director and board chairman of the Future of Music Coalition based in Washington, D.C. Please welcome these two rock stars to today's version of the smartest people in the room. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's so good. I love seeing all of our friends in the chat. I wish we were all in the same room, but alas, this will have to suffice for now. Well, I'm really
with you on that.
Exactly. Well, Dick, I'm so excited to do this, and it was a blast when we had the tables turned a couple of weeks ago, and it feels like we're just kind of at a dinner table having a conversation and inviting everybody to listen in.
Doesn't it? This is like an extendo conversation plus turnabout is fair play. So
Exactly.
you can dig in and ask whatever you want, and I will do my best to answer.
So we met back in, probably, almost maybe 18 or so years ago. I know I was at KEXP and you were doing a lot of work with Beggars, and we came together because I was building out all these digital tools and digital services, and you came to the table and had free downloads to be able to offer. So that's how our relationship started a long time ago. And one of my first impressions was that how passionate you were about artists and about music. And that's a theme of what we're going to talk about today. So let's just kind of start. You moved to New York from Michigan. So what, do you, and you have a few photos that you might be willing to share of back in the day?
I do. I always, I can't help but poke fun at myself. So I'm going to do that right now. Let's see if I can. Let's see here. What I really want to show people is that at one point I had really long hair. Can you see that?
Oh, that's
Everybody
awesome.
see that? So in case it's not clear enough just how long my hair was there, you can really see it here.
Oh, that is such a good look, Dick.
Isn't that a great look? I was totally going for that Western thing that David Rawlings pulls off so well and that I pulled off so poorly. And there's another one that I want to show you, which this is actually more what I looked like when I wasn't posing for a picture and when I was getting started in music, which actually goes further back than Michigan, Vickie. It goes back to North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
That was really where it started for me. But anyway, those are the pictures I wanted to show, and now I've made fun of myself enough, and I'm turned that off.
Excellent, excellent. So Michigan to New York, and you were a musician, right? So all of this started with your own quest to learn to play music. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it did start in Michigan at college, at University of Michigan. I started taking lessons from a friend, but I wasn't really into it. I didn't really get into it until I met a girl, which is probably the story of 99% of male musicians in the music industry. So I met a girl, and that's when I got really, really into it. But in between that jump from Michigan to New York, I took a couple detours. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated college. I started out working for an incentive travel company for some number of years in Ann Arbor. And then I decided after sort of at the tail end of that I wanted to start looking into the outdoor industry. So I moved out to Utah, spent a winter out in Utah, working at a ski shop, selling skis. And I was still, I don't know, thumbing around on the guitar, I guess. But when I really, really got into guitar was probably when I moved to North Carolina. So this was also the point where I felt like my life started to diverge. I started to have a career on one hand, which paid the bills, and a passion on the other hand. And when I broke up with that girl that I mentioned, who later became my wife, so there's a good end to the story. So I moved to North Carolina, and I really started, it was around that time, I moved to North Carolina, and I really started playing guitar every spare second that I had. And after a couple of years of that, you know, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd leave the guitar in my room, I'd play in bed, and I started, or I got the courage up at one point to play at the beach. I actually have one more slide I want to show, and I'll do this very quickly, but this is me at my very first performance ever at the beach with my band, which was embarrassingly called Hazy, Hot, and Huey. And you know, like everybody starts somewhere.
You got the alliteration going with that. You've got the alliteration going with that.
I had the alliteration going. So, you know, on one hand, I was doing a lot of programming and database work, which was what I went through school to do. And that was paying the bills for me, but I was spending more and more time with music, hanging out with more musicians. I started playing locally in clubs in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was while I was doing that one night I was playing an open mic, and I finished, and I was packing up and walking out the door, and I heard this voice that I couldn't believe. And I turned around and I walked back in. It was this young girl from Charlotte, turned out, who had the most otherworldly voice. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I've got to meet this girl. And so over the, I guess maybe next 3 months, I did. And I started coming to her shows and taping her. Introduced myself, was pretty awkward back then, but introduced myself, made all these tapes, and then one night sat down with her and we had a good heart to heart. And I said, you know, I've been playing a lot in music, but I don't think that playing in music is where I want to head. I think working in music is where I want to head. And I think you are super talented, and I think I can help you move past playing in clubs in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so that's what I did. That was the start of my sort of chunk of time where I left a full-time career doing database work and working for companies and doing a lot of travel, a lot of sales, business development, and started focusing just on music. It was also the time in my life when I had zero money, and where I would go out to shows 3 or 4 times a week. I was working with this young artist who I ended up signing to Glitter House Records in Germany. And that got me into tour management, because for her first tour, she was going to go over to Europe for a 7-week stint. They didn't have a tour manager, so I came along, and it turned out to be the most fun trip that I could possibly ever have had, because I was out with a musician named Bob Wiseman, another one named Don Kerr, who are two of the funniest guys in the music industry. So Bob Wiseman is the guy who, when Prince changed his name to Androgynous Symbol, whatever that was, Bob put out a press release and changed his name from Bob Wiseman to Prince. So that was sort of the tone of everything. And of course, then he got a cease and desist letter from Warner Brothers. But that was the tone of that tour. So 7-week tour through Europe, and it just sort of snowballed from that point. I took on more management clients. I spent more and more time still playing, but really getting involved with bands. And one of those bands, June, that I went to South by Southwest with in 1994, ended up playing for Roger Trust from Beggars Group. And that was my connection to Beggars Group. That's how I got started there.
That's so fascinating, because you made this change because you had a job. You were doing database and sales and technical work, what you went to university for. You didn't have any money, but you made this change because of passion and drive, and then you made it work.
I made it work. It reminds me a little bit of what you went through. We talked about this last week in your interview, where you started out in one place and you thought, you know what, I can't continue there.
Yeah.
And I was the same way. I thought, you know what, I don't want to be a database programmer and a thread salesman for the rest of my life. I want to do something different. And being able to transition from working with artists and hanging with artists and having fun with artists to actually making a living didn't really happen until the I guess would have been the fourth band that I started managing, Stella, who also was signed by Leslie Bleakley to Beggars Group. And she, I guess it was 2 weeks before our record was due to come out, a guy who's now the manager of Slipknot was head of marketing at Beggars, and Corey left. So we had no marketing for our record. And at the time, I was having lots of arguments about, did I want to do with my wife about, do I want to do music full time, or am I just going to keep playing at it? And this opportunity came along to take over the marketing efforts at Beggars US, just at the right time, which to me was just a sign from heaven that this is what I was meant to do. So that's what I did. And we moved to New York.
That's amazing. So that's kind of the backstory to all of the work that you've done with artists and different artist campaigns over the years. And I feel like one of the things that I've always really admired about you, Dick, is that you're not just working in the business and saying, oh yes, this is my job to promote indie artists. You're working in the business, you're backing that up by subscribing to artists, pledge or, Kickstarter campaigns or Patreon, you subscribe to lots of different music services, you go to a ton of shows, you back up your words with a lot of action. So let's talk a little bit more about what you have done with artists, because I feel like we still haven't quite cracked the perfect scenario for all artists in our music economy. And you did some really groundbreaking things back in the early days that I want you to talk a bit about, and then let's talk about how that applies to what's happening now, because I think that you had some really important learnings in those early campaigns with some of the artists that you work with.
That's a great multi-layered question. Thank you, Vickie. So I think the best way to put this out there is that I had a really good mentor. When I came to Beggars, I, within a year of being there, started their new media department, and I had the opportunity to work directly with Martin Mills. And that that was an incredible learning experience. So for 4 years, I got to get a look inside his brain. I got to travel around with him quite a bit. And we got to strike all the very early artist and catalog deals for Beggars. And that taught me that taught me the importance of not just giving away your music. It taught me the importance of keeping control on things, which reemerged later. As we'll get to that in a minute. But that, you know, when I left Beggars in, I guess it was 2002, and started Toolshed, you know, the idea was, let's do this. Let's bring Beggars along as a client, but no longer be focused just on this one record label. And let's do these same kinds of things that I was doing at Beggars for labels and for artists. And, you know, that opportunity brought me, or that thinking, I guess, brought me into onto the radar of a lot of really eclectic independent music people. Slim Moon was one of the first ones. And Portia was on here talking about her side of Kill Rock Stars, and Kill Rock Stars was my first non-Beggars client. And after that was Ani DiFranco at Righteous Babe, who many years previous to that, I had almost had the opportunity to tour manage. I'll tell the story really quickly. She was, Ani's manager had called me up after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of pestering him about, can I tour manage for Ani? He finally called me up and said, I have a tour. It's going to be great. You're going to go on the Pacific Northwest, and it's Canada. You'll have lots of time alone. It'll be for 3 weeks or so. Are you interested? And I said, yes, I'm totally interested. And I said, wait, when is it? And he said, well, it's going to start next week. And then I looked in the other room at my wife, Sally, who is 8 3/4 months pregnant. And I thought, what am I going to do? And so I did get the guts up to ask her. And of course she said, over my dead body, there's no way you can do that. So I didn't end up tour managing Ani, but I did get to work with her. And I worked with her, in fact, for about 15 years at her label. And what I learned from these engagements, from working with these sort of seminal independent record labels, Merge, Touch and Go, Saddle Creek, Spin Art, so many more, and artists like Arcade Fire, or we did several Arcade Fire records. We taught these artists, or we worked with these artists. In some cases, they taught us, but we worked with them in a very engaged manner. First, on bringing them into our network of promotional outlets. So that's where I ran into you first. But then subsequent to that, I think we got into the more interesting phase of what we were doing. And the more interesting phase, the part where we started working in the social media space with artists. So initially, artist promotion in social media was literally promotion. It was getting a feature slot on iMeme or some of these very early digital players. And that transitioned, maybe the third big transition that I had in my business was transitioning from promotion on independent or on social media networks to growing audience. And growing audience is where I really, I think, got excited about it. I mean, it was exciting all the way along, but it was super fun to take a well-known artist or an unknown artist, either one, and get them past talking to their friends. So, you know, in the case of well-known artists, obviously they had a much bigger network than their friends, but in most cases, they either weren't on their social media profiles, or they were very disconnected. They were sort of, many of the artists that I worked with were sort of in the sort of not talking directly to their audience phase of of artists. There was a big transition there around 2010, maybe to 2000, maybe to now. And so artists like Amy Ray or Martin Sexton or Ani, these artists didn't know out of the box, didn't understand out of the box the power of the tools. In many cases, didn't even want to use the tools. All of them now use the tools, and they use them very effectively. And we were part of that whole transition, which really at the tail end of that transition, that led me into work with Future Music Coalition, which is another place where you and I overlapped.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so it's interesting that this was all in a time period, like this is like early 2000s to 2010, when streaming had not taken hold. There was download revenues, but it was really early. And you worked with some of these artists who were really big in the 90s and the early 2000s, who probably were not, no one was really a digital native at that point, but you were able to provide a framework for them to promote their music. What was that like? I mean, were artists resistant to that? Were artists resistant to, engaging with their fans and asking their fans to do anything? What was the climate like?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating time because, we would try to, I can remember a conversation with one artist, and I said, I begged and pleaded and said, I promise, if you write a post in your own words, we'll put it up for you. You don't even have to know how to post it. Just send us something in your own words with a picture attached of you doing something, and I promise it's going to be the most engaging post that you've ever done. And this sounds trite and obvious now, but it wasn't trite and obvious back in 2010. And we did that, and it was the biggest thing by a factor of 4 in terms of engagement and likes that they had ever had, especially in terms of engagement, comments, responses too. And that opened a lot of artists' eyes. It, continued to open my eyes. And it also moved us sort of at the tail end of the marketing phase of the work that I did with Toolshed into focusing on artists that were legacy artists who hadn't really made the transition from the physical world to the digital world, and certainly not to the social media world. We spent a lot of time, we mined a lot of ground, and then I met artists like Aaron McEwen and Melissa Farrick, and we worked with Indigo Girls. It was a crazy and fun time to be part of the early part of social media world, and that's really been the I guess the blessing part of my career, if there's been a blessing part, is that I've always worked so far out on the forefront of what's happening that I've had the opportunity to really set the bar with some of the artists and some of the labels that I've worked with, and help them sort of see around the next corner. And at the last thing I want to say about that is, when we moved out of marketing, I sort of felt like the 15 years that I've been involved in digital, or 20 years actually, I've been involved in digital marketing was enough. That at that point, there were so many digital native artists, kids and artists and labels that were doing it their own way. I sort of felt like that was time to take myself out of it, let somebody else do it for a while.
Yeah, I think that, I think things ebb and flow. Well, when you think about those early experiences, and then you fast forward to where we are now, most artists have their music up everywhere. So most people have kind of adopted this view of, I want my music on Spotify, I want my music on Apple, I want my music everywhere, I want to have videos out, I want to, be discoverable in a Google search, and be able to have their music free, available in any kind of legal service. But that seems like that's more of the foundation, and that the really exciting things that are bringing artists meaningful revenue and meaningful ways of engaging with fans are other kinds of campaigns and other ways of touring, VIP, various different things. Can you talk a little bit about what you were one of the pioneers working with independent artists, and can you talk a little bit about the landscape now and where, advice or what you think is really working, especially maybe for these artists that are not necessarily the 20-something digital natives who can do everything themselves, but they may be now more legacy acts?
Sure. So there's two sides to that. The first side is which is where I usually start on when I'm thinking about a question like this, is where am I focused? What can I do now to try to create either a better ecosystem or a better opportunity for where we are now in music, that's focused on my friends that are artists, and labels too. And so to get to that, the marketing for me was really micro. Moving it to macro made a lot of sense. And it was when I was starting to think about the macro side of music that I got into the Spotify work and some of the other licensing work that's culminated now in working with Jackstone, an official music credits platform, something that's desperately needed inside the music industry, and really doesn't exist in an official capacity. Or working with Paperchain, which is all about advancing earned but unpaid DSP revenues. So these are big picture issues that have long needed to be fixed. As far as where we are right now, you're looking at a lot of the same things that I am. I'm certainly, as are many of the people in the chat, I've been able to watch all of the chat stuff going by. That it's great to see so many friends in there. Live streaming is an area that I'm really focused on right now. It reminds me a lot of the environment or the space that I was in when I was doing the early work in social media and the early work in promotional marketing, in that there's a ton of different platforms. Everybody thinks they've got the solution. We're not really sure which solution is the right one. But the thing that seems to be emerging that I think is amazing, and I'm sure many people on the list would agree with me here, or on the chat would agree with me here, is this idea that an artist owns its presence, owns their presence, sorry. And I'm really interested in the platforms that are focused on the artist owning their presence. I think there's a future there. I mean, you're seeing it you see it in other media verticals, and I think you'll see it in this one too, that more and more artists are going to go down this road of engagement. Doesn't mean all of them will, by the way. I mean, there are always, I just saw an artist today on Bandcamp, a young woman from Australia. Actually, I think it was on the file list. But, where the artist's music is so undeniable, so massive, the Jeff Buckley kind of artist, where it's just going to break through because it's so good, because everybody that hears it is going to be blown away. There is a huge chunk of other music out there that is almost that good and that deserves an audience, but where the artist and musicians or musician will need to build that audience on their own. And I'm going to continue to focus on companies that I think are adding something positive to the music ecosystem. As you know, Vickie, I waded pretty deeply into the whole user-centric pricing discussion back in the aughts about whether or not it would make sense to change the distribution of digital revenues. I think that ship has probably mostly sailed at this point. But but I stuck my neck out there on it, and I did it because right or wrong, I did it because of my friends who are musicians and my belief in musicians and my desire to continue to contribute positively to that, in particular to the middle segment of the market, artists that I think of as cultural treasures that have struggled with the quick transition, the sort of rapid fire transition that we've gone through from, I mean, it's only been 20 years, Vickie, selling physically to selling an album digitally to selling a single digitally to renting music, all in 20 years. Name another industry that's moved that quick.
Exactly. Well, I want to go back to something you said that I think is so important, is artists need to own their own presence. I think that's so powerful, because I think, in the era before I started working in music, when it was, when things had gatekeepers and there was a label that did everything and the artist just kind of created music and then other third parties did everything. I think that that's a really important shift in terms of who's owning and putting out their identity. And I try not to use the word brand when I'm talking about artists, because I feel like identity is much more, feels better. But talk a little bit about that, about artists owning their own presence. I mean, live streaming is definitely one of it, but tell me what you really mean by that, because I feel like that's important advice.
It is important advice, and I don't know if anybody's going to call me out in the chat and sort of practice what you preach. I mean, I did work for a record label, and that's certainly not about owning your own, or hasn't traditionally been about owning your own space. But I've what does it mean to me? I think I'm excited to see the emergence of more and more opportunity. And I don't know if Michelle Schacht is in this or is watching, but I'm being very careful about how I say this. But I do think that artists need to have the opportunity to make a choice. And the music they're putting the music out into the world. And if that choice includes working with record labels, then great. If it includes not working with record labels, then great. Let's see the tools for that. And that's what we're seeing a lot of right now. If it, where it gets challenging is sort of balancing the law, DMCA, against the availability of music. And so many artists have gone down this road and tried to manage this prints. I mean, there's so many. Michelle's just another one in this respect. And I really do believe that the end all for artists is, and again, I don't know if I'm going to get pilloried for this or not, but I think it's communication. I think you communicate with the people who want to listen to your music on your terms, to the extent that you're able to. And my focus is going to be on continuing to look at platforms and associate myself with platforms as much as I can that focus on that expand that opportunity. I don't know that I can fix everything, but I'm going to do as much as I can, with my limited opportunity.
Well, and I think you're working with a lot of different companies that are providing different tools and different ways to surface music. We have this, I like to think of the available catalog as a lake. It's like this big opaque lake full of 50 million songs. And how do you find the ones that are meaningful to you? And it's all about surfacing that music to get it in front of the right people. But artists do have a ton of choices right now. It's they can go with a label, they can go without a label, go on their own, get a team, keep things off the platforms and reserve those for, fans in another way, put everything out and make everything for free. It's almost like a too much choice in some sense. We don't really know what works yet, like we did in the old days.
We don't. And one of the nice things about not being in marketing directly is that I've had the good fortune, I guess, to just stay friends or at least associated with a lot of really great artists. And now I can share with them ideas that I have without having to turn it into a marketing campaign. I don't have to pitch them on anything. I like that. I enjoy that. And the other side of that I would love to talk about just a little bit is not just on the music side, but also on the professional side. So, as far as you and me and others in the music business are concerned. So, the whole COVID thing for me has really drawn into sharp focus, this sort of opportunity for self-reflection, self-advancement. And in my case, it got me really excited about looking at executive ed and about upping my game. And as you know, Vickie, because you and I have talked about this 100 times, you have your MBA. I don't have my MBA. I wish I did have an MBA, but I found by sort of sinking this into my head and thinking, how can I get this done now and up my financial vernacular? How can I speak more knowledgeably? How can I improve myself? And I found this opportunity with, I've been following for some number of years, Scott Galloway, who's he's a personality that very successfully sold his marketing company to Gartner in 2017 for $150 million. And he did it by looking at companies that had grown past past $1 trillion, or that were going towards $1 trillion or past $1 billion. I can't remember. I should have had this written down. But anyway, he did an analysis of companies that were able to change the valuation of their company from a transactional based viewpoint to a multiple of revenue viewpoint. And that's what we did in music too.
Right.
So I found this really interesting, and I thought, I'm gonna follow this guy. And I did, and he, after about 3 years, I guess, of following him, he offered a class, and I jumped at it, and I took the class. And after taking the class, they reached out and said, hey, you really engaged on this. Would you be interested in teaching? So for the last 6 months or so, I've been teaching as a contractor, brand strategy for
Nice.
Professor Galloway's new company. Yeah. And that has been one of the most interesting things I've ever gone through, because it's let me fill in a chunk that I didn't have. And maybe you felt the same way about it when you got your MBA, that maybe it just sort of filled a piece that you were glad to have in your armor, a way to be more financially literate, for instance, or in this case, more brand literate. It was exciting for me.
Well, it is. And I feel like you've always been really driven around process and education and kind of being very methodical about giving a discipline to the artist campaigns, giving a discipline to the work that you've done with managing artists. You're also an avid gardener, and now you're a teacher, and all of these things are very much about kind of, internalizing and then sharing and helping to enable the people around you. With the teaching, do you feel like have you had moments where you can see things that you can apply to the industry and to
Sure.
your work that you wouldn't have otherwise made the connection?
Well, so 2 levels there. The first level is this whole idea of of personal brand, which of course is something that artists think about, whether overtly or non-overtly, all the time. But they're always building their personal brand. So many of us that work in music aren't always focused on our personal brand, or at least not that way. So for me, the idea of building a personal brand was always core to, and it was core in the sense, but I wanted to be core not in a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not in a surfacey way, but in a very core way. And that's why I've always felt that opportunity in music presents itself for those who scratch past the surface. I spent time doing that when I was a manager. I spent a lot of time doing it now. I know you do the same thing. It's one of the reasons that you and I think are friends, that we try to go past the surface and dig deeper. And you know, the whole opportunity to live on a farm and become a gardener, passionate gardener, and raise my kids on a farm, 3 girls that I'm super proud of, was so core to who I am that there's no way that I could present that other than being a genuine picture of who I am as a person. I'm not just a digital music guy. I'm not just somebody that likes music. This is something that's really important to me too. Getting my hands in the dirt is something that I do when I have a real sticky music problem in my head. And that happens to me at least several times a week. So I want to go out, I want to weed.
A couple times a day.
A couple times a day. I want to think, I want to pull weeds up.
Yeah.
And I want to line everything up in a row in my head. And that's how that time, which you don't get sitting in front of your email, is the most valuable time that I have.
Yeah. And do you, so I remember when you told me, I was in New York, I was living in Seattle time. And I remember I was in New York and you said, oh, I'm going to move to a farm. And I thought, what are you doing? Why would you move to a farm? And then, and then I saw what you were doing. And I feel like there is something that is incredibly satisfying about gardening and seeing things grow. Do you feel like in some ways, like you look at your plants in the same way, in your garden in the same way that you look at artists, where, you're toiling and you're working and then there's a bloom and a blossom? Well,
yes, maybe not for the reason you're thinking, but it's more of a pride thing, that I take pride in doing a good job. Yeah. And if that's a good job in a garden, that's a good job in a garden. If it's a good job on a campaign, it's a good job on a campaign. And I back it up. We had campaigns that I did at Toolshed that, for whatever reason, we fumbled it. It just did not work. And this is somebody's livelihood we're talking about here. So it's not, that sucks on about 10 different levels. And when that happened, the least I could do was give the money back that I took for the campaign, because we didn't deliver. And for me, it's always, I try to make it about delivering. I try to focus on things where if my name's attached to it, it's got to mean something. And, it's easy to get a quick buck in the music industry. Not hard at all. It's a lot harder to focus on the things that really matter. And, as far as what the things are that really matter, people may disagree. Maybe people think the things that I think really matter don't matter, but they're what matter to me. And I can get up and look myself in the mirror in the morning when I'm working on them. And, I hope that's the trajectory of my career in music or education or whatever it winds up being for the remainder of the time that I have.
Well, you do seem like, like you're very personally committed to everything and trying to get deals to be as fair as possible, trying to do the best job. And I feel like there are a lot of people that come kind of crashing into the music industry that don't have that philosophy. Do you, you know, Tom, I know that we have a hard stop, and so I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to that. I don't see any things in the Q&A, so I'm just going to use, we have like 5 minutes left. Is that right, Tom? Okay. So Jim Griffin just typed ISRC.
ISRC.
Well, you know, we can't, how could we not talk about ISRC codes? So, but one of the things that I do feel like you're working on, you know, with JAXTA, what's underneath JAXTA? It's data and metadata. What's in paper chain? It's data and metadata. You know, this is the way that people get paid. So can you talk a little bit about kind of, I feel like there's this throughput with artists in everything that you're doing. What do you have to say to artists who may be listening, or people that are managing artists around ISRCs and managing data?
Right. Well, you know, there's not going to be an epiphany here other than I just had a discussion with an artist the other day about this, and super talented artist who shall remain nameless, who plays with, you know, a ton of session gigging for all of the best artists that we know. And I've had several conversations with this artist about taking the time when they're largely off the road to get a handle on what their metadata picture is. This is part of what JAXTA does. So it shows you your metadata picture. It's not the only tool to do it, but it's a great tool to do it. And I guess where I get frustrated in music, I can't help but be frustrated in music, is when I hear somebody say, I totally have to do that, but then they don't. And, you know, the way I look at it, I mean, I run a business. In that business, my responsibility to invoice, my responsibility to get new business, my responsibility to do a lot of the things that you can easily change the person and the words, and it's the same as a musician in their own business. Mm-hmm. So if I screw up, if I don't do something or take care of something, then bad on me. So, you know, I just would say to musicians, this is now is your opportunity, if there ever was one, to get a handle on the data that underpins what you do and who you've done that with, who participated on your records. You know, use tools like JAXTA or other tools, Disco. There's a zillion of them to get a handle on what is happening with your digital presence, because I know so many artists who don't have a handle on it, right. and for whom it's all over the place. And, you know, pinball machine's a pinball machine. If you're the pinball, it sucks.
Right. Well, and it's also, I feel like, you know, you made this comment earlier about, you know, artists should manage their own presence. And that doesn't mean that they need to do it in a vacuum. That could be with their manager, with their label, with their co-collaborators, anybody that's going to help them. You know, and there's layers that go underneath a digital presence. You want to have your identifiers right. But I think one thing that you've brought up, which I think is really great, is also just like being true to your mission and your work, and doing that in a way that's honorable for yourself and for your partners.
I just, you know, want to challenge everybody from the music industry that's listening to this today. Thank you. And you know, many of us have good ideas that can help that can take the musician sort of out of the basement, as it were, or at the end of the line, and move them forward in the line, because that's where they belong. They belong further up, if not at the head of the line. And use your brain, use your time to focus on, you know, even if you work somewhere where, you know, that might be considered anti-artist, use the opportunity to move the needle where you are in the direction of the artist. There's nothing, and we haven't even talked about songwriters, but now's our opportunity to really make a difference for the artist community, the artist world. So let's try to do that. Everybody try to do that. That's what I'm going to try to do, and make yourself smarter, improve your brand, improve your influence, and then go out there and use it on behalf of artists. That's what I got to say.
That's great. And I love the advice of let's move artists a little bit further up the front of the line. That's a great metaphor. And perhaps
Agreed.
that's a great closing on this, Dick. Thank you so much for lending your time. And I love hearing the stories. And Tom, thanks for putting this on.
Hey,
Likewise. Thank you, Tom.
You're so welcome, but the thanks go to you two for sharing your time and your wisdom, your charm, your intelligence, just being rock stars that you are. And I'm reading all the chat pats on the back that you're receiving. They're so well deserved, and so thank you. Folks, a couple of final announcements as you hear me wrap this up. Our next program is on Tuesday, and we are featuring one of the remaining original Outlaws, Chris Gantry, who wrote a hit for Glenn Campbell back in the day, who hung out at Woodstock. You talk about a guy who's going to tell some stories. You ain't heard nothing yet. So please tune in to our program on Tuesday. Also, remember what I said at the top of the program. We're having a virtual job fair. Actually, Dimitri is having a virtual job fair. I showed you the link earlier, so hop on over there if you want to hear about 10 different companies talking about open positions that they have right now. It's going to be awesome, and I'm going to be there emceeing the proceedings. Lastly, please vote on November 3rd. In the meantime, wear a face mask so we can all get back together in person soon. It's killing every one of us. So with that, I'll say good day and stay safe and healthy.